without that clarity. And also, it does remind many of us who are pay close attention to what we call the X tokens, XRP, XLM, XDC. Just seems like there's a consistent theme with Elon Musk and things X. So will this mean that the X tokens have a place in this sort of new Twitter financial ecosystem? I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, of course, this is all just speculation, but yeah, if you are going to have an X everything app, seems like you'd want an X type, payment token that's driving and moving value around on that app.
There is a challenge that is coming from digital currencies such as blockchain technologies.
So I think it's important to share that anything can be tokenized.
All the money.
I like the idea of a gold standard. I mean, it could be used in a very cryptocurrency way.
Very much sooner than a lot of people understand or think. We will be all at a level playing field.
Hey, welcome to the show. Molly Elmore here. This is the April 14th edition of Escape Velocity. Hey, Jimmy, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Molly.
So today we're going to talk about what happened this week in geopolitics, the world of money, and blockchain. We had quite a few interesting and bizarre things happening this week. Would you agree with me on that?
Every week's, it just becomes more fun than the week before.
So we picked out 4 different topics to talk about today. It was actually challenging because there was quite a few strange things that happened this week. We're going to get started. And the first one is kind of from my former wheelhouse around being a marketing person is there's a bizarre trend going on in the world of corporate marketing with very, very large consumer brands to have Dylan Mulvaney as the spokesperson. It's created quite a bit of backlash. And the thing that I find most bizarre is that some of these brands like Oil of Olay, Nike, Bud Light, huge consumer brands, they spend tons of money on advertising, have large agencies, creative agencies and media agencies, and none of them have the same target market. Like the people who buy Bud Light are not the same people who buy Oil of Olay skin cream. We'll just keep it at this level. So the idea that this one spokesperson fits all of these different brands is actually just quite a strange phenomenon. So we actually dug into it a little bit more. And Jimmy, why don't you talk a little bit about what we learned regarding BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street's role around ESG for kind of the mandates for these large corporate brands?
Yeah, so I was a little surprised to learn about this. We of course knew, and I've heard for many years about ESG, environmental, social, governance type mandates being put down or being imposed on corporate management from basically large stockholders. So think about BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, these large shareholding institutions. Certainly in my work with public companies in the past, we had known about like ISS and shareholder organizations that would rate management performance usually around the time that the proxy statement would come out, and stockholders would be voting on who serves as their board of directors and things like that. And compensation. So things like, and they would rate things like how executive comp stood up in the marketplace and things like that. So what we learned is actually, to me, it's a little troubling. We learned that there's other kind of what we call social credit scoring, social ratings that are being imposed by these large stockholding groups onto corporate management, and that seems to be where the genesis of a lot of this bizarre, what I'll call just unique marketing things, is coming up. But there's a ratings called HRC. It's the Human Rights Campaign, which actually started back in the 80s. I was unaware of that. It manifested as this Corporate Equality Index, the CEI, which starts around 2002. But at this point, it's kind of completely been imposed on some of the largest organizations in the world. And I think you're going to put up the woke index that they've come up with. But I'm just going to go down the 5 principles of the woke index. So there's workforce protections, which gets you up to 5 points. No discrimination for employment for sexual orientation or gender identity. There's inclusive benefits. This is a big one. It's 50 points possible. And these are all to build towards a score of 100. The criteria here includes providing health care for like same-sex couples. So you can get up to 50 points by, basically encouraging same-sex type relationships within your corporate organization. Supporting inclusive culture, 25 points possible there. These are things like gender neutral dress codes and trans inclusive restroom and other facilities. And then this is the one where Dylan Mulvaney shows up. It's corporate social responsibility, up to 20 points possible. This is in your marketing or advertising to LGBTQ type consumers. And then the last one is called responsible citizenship, which you can get deducted up to 25 points if you are basically if your company is funding organizations that are against LGBTQ equality. So it appears to be this kind of nebulous social virtue signaling score that is what is infiltrating these corporations at the highest level, being imposed by the large stockholders. And obviously the management, the senior management, like your CEOs and your board of directors, are being influenced pretty substantially by this social credit scoring.
The thing I find bizarre in this era that we live in is I spent over 10 years analyzing advertising. That was my job, was to basically tell people if their ads were good or not. And I'm just going to pick on the Oil of Olay ad specifically. It's a silly ad. It's kind of slapstick. It is not in line with anything I've ever seen Procter & Gamble convey for the Oil of Olay brand. I've worked on Oil of Olay projects in the past. It's a very kind of elegant, serious brand that generally targets older women. And this ad is almost like mocking the target market in a way. It's a little bit slapstick. And for me to publicly say that, I'm like at risk that I'm going to be labeled as sort of a transphobic person. But that has nothing to do with the ability to criticize the ad as just being not very effective marketing, not very persuasive, and not in line with the brand. So now we've kind of entered this era where if people want to criticize some of these ads, you are sort of labeled with these kind of non-tolerant viewpoints, which is a strange era, especially to see for these large Fortune 10 brands to be engaging in marketing that is not in line with how they've presented their brand for decades. Bud Light is the same thing. So
yeah, and what's the recourse for stockholders? So Anheuser-Busch lost almost $7 billion off its market cap in the days following the release of the can that had Miss Mulvaney's face on it. People lost money, right, because of these marketing efforts by Anheuser-Busch. And if a stockholder wanted to bring a lawsuit, they'll basically turn around and weaponize this transphobic messaging back at them. So it puts stockholders in a very awkward situation in an environment like the whole point of the fiduciary duties of management and boards of directors is to be managing the business in a way that maximizes stockholder wealth. Now, look, there's obviously things like there's the old civil action case that they made the movie about where DuPont was dumping chemicals in the riverbed behind their facilities. There are things like that which we're certainly not advocating for, which cause damages outside of the the stockholder contract. But things like how you market, you should be marketing to increase your bottom line. And if you're doing something that is directly against your target market, what's the recourse for stockholders here? It's a big problem. You saw that you had some you had some celebrities like Kid Rock go out and, he shot up a bunch of Anheuser-Busch cans. John Rich has said he's not going to have Anheuser-Busch products at the Redneck Riviera Bar in Nashville. And Travis Tritt is not going to take Anheuser-Busch products on tour with him this tour cycle. So there is backlash in kind of the celebrity community. I've seen a video of a Anheuser-Busch distributor talking about how it's going to affect him personally because people just aren't buying the product. And what was the point? You got a few extra points on your woke index thing here, which isn't even clear what the agenda is behind this whole woke index thing in the first place. It's the type of thing we as a society really should be asking those questions.
And for the marketing community, it's a strange situation because there's sort of this risk of trying to candidly discuss like the implications here and the consequences of this type of marketing, this non-aligned marketing, because this fear of being kind of labeled with some of these derogatory, discriminatory labels. So strange week. We'll see if next week the trend continues and more large brands that have no target market in common with any of these other brands we discussed continue to use Dylan Mulvaney as spokesperson. So we'll see.
Yeah.
All right. Topic number 2. Jimmy, what you got with this one?
So topic number 2 is it's the X Everything app. So what really got us looking into this is that Twitter, now X, X app, has announced a partnership with eToro, which is a broker-dealer of stocks and currencies that's competitive to like a Robinhood type of an app. Very successful app. So they're partnering up so that Twitter, now X, can bring those types of services to people who are actually on Twitter. So as you start to look in this, it's really fascinating. It'll be a great kind of corporate story to follow because the X.com goes back to the very early days of PayPal. In fact, I think in 1999, Elon Musk initially had with a partner X.com, which was going to be an online banking application. In 2001, they changed that to PayPal. And ultimately, they sold PayPal, I think, to eBay in like 2015. Now, kind of under the radar, Elon had a special affinity, so he says, for X and X.com. So he repurchased X.com from PayPal in 2017. Now, when he went to buy Twitter, he actually did it with, it's a very common structure in buying public companies. The way that they're actually implemented is through what we call a triangular merger, where you basically have a holding corp that drops down a subsidiary that ultimately ends up merging with the target company. That's exactly how the Twitter merger was implemented, except the parent company on top was called X Holdings, Inc., and the merger sub was X.com. So they just announced within a couple of days ago that Twitter Inc. has been consolidated into X.com. So it seems like Elon's goal of having this kind of X Everything app, which he wants to be like WeChat in China. WeChat's an app that has instant messaging, social media, and also has the ability to do mobile payments. He believes it's kind of the perfect all-in-all app. He calls Twitter, basically the public square. So it's starting to see his vision of having kind of everybody coming and interacting on Twitter. He's also talked about how people can start to monetize their own content on Twitter with cryptocurrency plumbed into that, blockchain type payment structures plumbed into that. Can be very, very powerful, even more powerful than Twitter already is, with I think 384 million users or something like that. So we're starting to get a glimpse. All this happened at the same time that he had this BBC interview where he basically caught the interviewer didn't know what they were talking about and probably lying, saying that they'd seen an increase in hate speech, and then he asked for an example, and the interviewer couldn't even give him one example, and then started to kind of backtrack and say, well, I haven't been looking at it that much and all this stuff. It really looked like a complete, buffoon, but, hey, that's the media.
One thing I found strange about the timing of the eToro partnership announcement is we're still in this era of regulatory uncertainty around cryptocurrencies in the United States. So if Elon Musk starts introducing mass market, essentially trading, are we sure that none of these are securities? Like, is XRP going to be listed in this? Like, it just seems like a strange move to do prior to the Ripple lawsuit being settled.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, the Ripple lawsuit continues to be a massive over the digital asset sector. We don't even, in fact, you've got the case in New York where the Attorney General of New York is even saying that Ethereum's a security. So there's no clarity in the space other than the regulators seem to say that Bitcoin is a commodity. At least they're speaking in unison right now, but they won't approve, and the SEC won't approve a BTC spot ETF. So how they're keeping that from going through. So yeah, it's a good point. Maybe Elon knows some stuff we don't. Maybe he's playing a game at a different level. We know from prior comments he's made because of SEC's, adverse activities towards Tesla and other companies that Elon has run, that that it's an adversarial type relationship. He said publicly he does not respect the SEC, and maybe he's playing a game that's at a little different level than the SEC is prepared for.
And a couple of days ago, he swapped out the Twitter logo for the Dogecoin logo, which again kind of confirms this relationship with cryptocurrencies. Be interesting to see if Dogecoin becomes a payment app on the X.com app without that clarity. And also, it does remind many of us who are pay close attention to what we call the X tokens, XRP, XLM, XDC. Just seems like there's a consistent theme with Elon Musk and things X. So will this mean that the X tokens have a place in this sort of new Twitter financial ecosystem? I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, of course, this is all just speculation, but yeah, if you are going to have an X everything app, seems like you'd want an X type, payment token that's driving and moving value around on that app.
That makes sense to me. All right, topic number 3 is this idea of a debt jubilee. So we have been paying close attention to press coverage of debt forgiveness. There was an article this week about a church buying up quite a bit of debt for members of its congregation. And then this morning, there was more coverage around the Supreme Court and the student loan forgiveness, which is billions and billions of dollars. So it looks like we're seeing many indicators in the marketplace of widespread debt forgiveness, which I know is a controversial topic, but does look like this is a potential solution to the insane debt problem we have globally. And there's just so much debt that's been issued that it's not really feasible or possible for everyone to pay that debt off. And ironically, if you actually did pay off all the debt, the money would go away because the vast majority of money is created when debt is issued. So it's an interesting problem. Do you think we're going to see a debt jubilee, Jimmy? What's your take on this?
This is a topic that fascinates me. I just published this infographic on Nasara that apparently no one can talk about, but and it was polarizing, though I'd say it was overwhelmingly received very positively. And a debt jubilee component of a Nasara type action. So I've studied debt jubilees for quite some time. It's actually a biblical concept that goes back to the Old Testament in Leviticus. I think it's chapter 25. God would require that every 50 years that some type of a jubilee, a forgiveness of debts, and a releasing of anybody who is in bondage to you. So basically, slave labor be allowed to be freed and go back home. So this kind of renewing cycle was something very common in Old Testament times. and was kind of required to kind of refresh humanity and give everyone a clean slate. But what I was surprised to see more recently is that there's actually some economists that are that have been claiming that a debt jubilee is the thing that could really solve the problem that has been created with quantitative easing and this endless printing of money to infinity that it's basically got us in the predicament that we're in now. You mentioned how money is created when debt is created. So when someone takes a loan to buy a home, or they spend money on credit cards and things like that, and money is basically being issued by these commercial banks. That's the creation of money. Um, Notably, when you basically take money from an individual's bank account and start paying on that mortgage or credit card or student loan, that ends up destroying money supply, taking money out of the system. So these economists, basically propose that, a debt jubilee is a more fair kind of way to deal with this issue. I think, and we're going to, the next topic we're getting into is kind of the continued de-dollarization. It is step towards putting the world and the world economies back on a gold standard. The United States is substantially out of whack because of the role we've served as a world reserve currency for the past 50 years. In fact, it's been over 50 years, right? It's been since Bretton Woods, since 1944, that the dollar has served as a reserve currency. For the last 50 years, we've deviated from the gold standard. Um, so, there needs to be some mechanisms to kind of bring the dollar back in line with the gold standard that is kind of as painless as you can make it for the American people. Because if you just dropped us into it, we're so far out of whack. It would destroy a lot of wealth. It would destroy a lot of people. People would lose their minds, I think, if that were all just happen at once. So as you kind of play back the last several years and seeing some of the things we've gone through, shutting down the economy for COVID, money printing. This is something you pointed out to me, that all the additional money printing. So you could see a debt jubilee being a necessary step to finally returning the dollar to the gold standard and putting everyone, like at the beginning of our show, everyone on a level playing field.
One thing I want to add, because I know the student loan forgiveness is quite controversial because it's not applying a fair debt forgiveness to everyone. I mean, not everybody in the country has student loans that need to be paid off. And, Jimmy and I both had student loans, but many decades ago, and the situation was actually quite different when we went to school. And currently, the cost of college and universities is so high, and that these student loans have almost become predatory. The quality of the education has not trended, and correlated directly with the increase in the price. And what has happened is a lot of these universities have become flush with cash. The professors have gotten raises, the administration's gotten raises, incredible infrastructure projects have been built on these school campuses, stadiums, libraries, incredible facilities, but the students are left to pay that bill. And in many cases, these loans are so difficult to pay off because the salaries that many of these student majors are commanding in response are just very difficult to, the salaries aren't high enough to pay off these loans. I mean, Jimmy, you were telling me that it took you a long time and you were a very successful corporate lawyer. Imagine somebody in a lower sort of tiered salary profession like a social worker or a, elementary school teacher. The years that are required to pay off these loans is just very challenging for people to deal with. So I actually think the entire student loan racket has become so predatory, And people have been, young kids are taken advantage of and pushed into taking out these very large loans with the belief that it's a good investment, and that, if they want to be successful in society, they have to, go and spend several $100,000 on a secondary education, where they're not even, in many cases, learning a lot of marketable, practical skills that will serve them in their career. So I'm actually a supporter of the student loan forgiveness, and I think the entire student loan racket should go away, so that universities will be forced to price their products accordingly when you don't have this fiat money printer behind them pumping up the price of tuitions.
Yeah, the problem with and you pointed this out at the beginning of your comment there, but the problem is it's not being applied equally, right? So I think it's about $6 billion that is going to get forgiven in this tranche. It's about 200,000 loans, and we know that those are going to be basically given to people who basically vote towards what the
Right.
Biden administration would want them to vote for. So they're basically using what maybe was initially a good idea, but basically blew a massive bubble into the cost of education, which is that basically you had the federal government guaranteeing loans for college students, and it worked exactly as you said. When the government puts their thumb on the scale of any industry, we see a bubble like this is created, and the beneficiaries of that bubble have been the administrations of these schools, the tenured professors, and people like that. And it really hasn't been there. There have been new degree programs that really aren't even worth being, college level degrees, where people come out and they're effectively saddled with debt and they're unemployable for what they've been learning for the past 4 years. Um, it really was eye opening to me about the time that I made partner, which was in 2010. So it was right after the financial crisis, and we had some real trouble with a lot of law firms at that time, big law firms, basically didn't bring in the people directly from law school that they had already given offers to because of the financial crisis. So if you came out in 2009, 2010, it was tough already. But these people, these young attorneys, were saddled with six figures in debt. Um, and the way they get structured, if you end up consolidating them and stuff, and you're kind of just paying towards the interest, you can try to pay them down, but you really got to pay them all off at once, or they kind of just keep sliding in perpetuity. So, it's I agree with you as far as like the problems that it's been caused from student loans and things of that nature. I would like to see this debt forgiveness be applied kind of for everybody.
I
Um,
agree.
the, yeah, and not just pick out certain groups, because that's not equal protection under the law. That's basically a politically motivated debt forgiveness.
And it's not fair to the families who really saved diligently and sacrificed, knowing they were going to have this big college bill, and prepared for it so that they wouldn't have the debt. It's not really fair to kind of
Well, what
penalize
about the
them
people
for
who
that.
didn't go to college? What about the people who basically
Right.
went to work, and their tax dollars are going to have to bear this just like everybody else's? It's not fair. It's not equal protection. It gets at the systemic issues that we're kind of talking about all the time now on this program. So
I agree it's not fair. I just think the whole college tuition thing in the current market is a racket. It's an indoctrination
mhm.
center, and it's not really serving students to be pushed into these debt levels. So a lot of problems, I think, with secondary education, unfortunately, in this
Mhm.
era. All right, our last topic is de-dollarization. This is something we've covered, I think, each week because it's such a massive topic, especially regarding the future of money. What happened this week that we want to cover?
Yeah, so just to recap, I mean, it really has been picking up a lot of steam. First, we had China and Russia basically say they're going to start trading in hydrocarbons, and Russia saying that they're returning their currency to a gold-backed standard. Then you had China brokering these Middle East peace deals between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which had some implication about international relations between Syria and Saudi Arabia as well. Last week we had France, which, I mean, France is part of NATO. France is part of the West, but they announced that they had basically completed an LNG trade, so liquefied natural gas trade, with China in the yuan. And Macron has basically been coming out saying that Europe generally needs to move away from its reliance on the dollar. So major cracks already, even in the Western alliance powers. Well, this week, the reason it's kind of made news again is because you had the president of Brazil, Lula da Silva, went over to China and basically continued this narrative of that, they're going to start trading with China outside of the U.S. dollar, and the Brazilian president was also calling for kind of other countries to be trading outside the dollar. Just before we came on, we've had this intelligence leak where we've learned, among other things that are happening in Ukraine, which we all kind of know anyway. We're learning that apparently U.S. intelligence sources have been spying on another ally, which is South Korea, and that South Korea may end up joining BRICS. So it's these dominoes continue to fall very quickly. Put it in the context of this debt forgiveness thing that we're just talking about. I really believe this is a coordinated effort to move back to the gold standard, which ultimately the U.S. will also have to do to stabilize our currency. But another brick.
One interesting thing too is if gold becomes money, or assets become money, with gold being the dominant asset, that means that we don't really need sovereign currencies in the same way that we currently do. So the state of Texas, for example, has announced plans to issue their own gold-backed currency, which could mean that consumers have a lot of choice, because Texas issued gold might not be that different than U.S. Treasury issued gold versus being different than, Montana gold. So what is your, as a Texan, what are your thoughts on Texas issuing a gold-backed currency?
Well, I'm excited to see that happen in Texas. I'm a proponent of returning to an asset-backed system. I believe that's the only way to truly have a level playing field where people can not otherwise manipulate their currencies so dramatically against fiat dollars. Right? It's just paper. Mm-hmm. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out in a more kind of national political type of way. In connection with that, we've seen some of the I don't even think they realize it's related, but we've had the Chamber of Digital Commerce, the Texas Blockchain Council, and Caitlin Long's group. There's also a Satoshi Fund, but they've sent a letter to Dan Patrick, the Lieutenant Governor of Texas, about the Texas legislature is making moves to basically eliminate tax breaks for Bitcoin mining operations in the state of Texas. You have to kind of say, if you're going back to a gold-backed currency, I think it's a gold-backed digital currency that's been proposed, by the way, by a couple of senators in Texas. You don't want to have basically a competing, certainly a Bitcoin type currency, be competing with you in your own state.
Hello. So we had some technical difficulties. The power went out in my office. So I know that our recording just before this ended abruptly. We had pretty much covered everything we wanted to talk about for the four main topics. But we have one important segment left. Jimmy, what's the segment that we love the most at the end?
We got to do memes.
Yes.
So I think I'm kicking it off.
Yeah, we have four memes that we picked. Jimmy's going to talk through the first one, and you can vote in our Twitter poll that I'll set up afterwards.
I don't know about you, but I thought this week memes were really hard to pick. Like, the funny stuff, I don't know if it's borderline too serious now or what, but I just had trouble kind of finding some really funny memes. However, this first meme is certainly an exception to that, and it's a dad walking in to like his son's setup laboratory, and he said, "Are you winning, son?" And this is like so us right now, right? He says, "Hold up, Dad. I'm re-architecting the global financial infrastructure with some friends." So that strikes a chord with me. Pretty funny
I
stuff.
did not find that one was very funny. All right, my first meme is making fun of the interview that Elon Musk had with the BBC, which you haven't watched any clips. Elon Musk pretty much roasted this reporter who had accused him of allowing Twitter to become this sort of haven for hate speech. And Elon Musk asked for an example, of which the reporter basically was like, "I don't have one. I don't use the For You feed. I don't know specifics on this accusation that I've just laid." So the reporter ended up kind of looking like an idiot, like a doofus. And this meme basically calls this reporter an NPC, a non-player character, which in the world of video games, which I know little about, the non-player characters are very inactive. They're almost like drones, little robots. They just sort of do their little section of the game and don't actually have autonomy or soul or any kind of consciousness. And so this reporter has been equated to being an NPC character like in a video game. So I thought that was pretty funny.
My daughter used to play, my youngest daughter used to play a bunch of Minecraft when she was younger. And they've got a bunch of characters that are just kind of wandering around or whatever, that you're taking stuff from them or shooting them and stuff like that. So the next one, it's not so much a meme as just something we should talk about. It is a meme, but we've been, for the past several weeks, I think we've had one every week. We've had what's an inverse Kramer type meme. This is an inverse Kramer type meme, but it's super suspect. So after the market closed yesterday, I think, Jim Cramer tweeted randomly out of the blue, "Boeing's really incredible." And then we woke up this morning to news that Boeing has had production problems with certain parts of their 737 planes, and it's going to slow down delivery. Their stock was down, 6%, like on the open, and it's just super weird to me. I don't know what you think, Molly, but it's really starting to seem like comms now, because the other things were kind of like, there was stuff going on in the market, like the banks. People should be concerned about the banks because banks were failing. So he'd make a comment like JP Morgan's a fortress or whatever. But this one is just completely out of the blue, random, and it's after market close. And we get the news like on market open about what's happening with Boeing. So I'm going to say that there's something going on here. What do you think?
It's beyond the point where it's sort of bad luck that he just seems to have like bad picks consistently. It's gotten to this sort of stage where it's almost an indicator that he is communicating, as you said, the opposite of what the tweet says. And, there's an inverse Kramer ETF, like there's Twitter accounts that are called inverse Kramer. People are closely watching this. And it's to this point where it's sort of beyond, I think, coincidence or even luck. So I agree with you. I think there's something very interesting and undisclosed about what's really going on with Jim Cramer and some of these tweets.
And it's so because what do we got? So if he was actually saying Boeing's got a problem, instead of what he says here, he's basically tipping the market with inside information. Did he have the information, like right after the market closed or thereabouts, where he's basically communicating this broadly so that, the people who are in on the joke know what to do. But here he could say with the SEC or FINRA, whoever's investigating kind of a tipping claim, insider trading type claim, he could just say, "What are you talking about? I said Boeing's doing great." And which is the opposite of what happened. So it's This one's highly suspect to me.
So weird.
Ought to be investigated, frankly.
And he doesn't seem to address it as far as I know. It's funny. So be cautious about ever taking any tips from Jim Cramer in case you were not aware of the inverse Cramer thing. But
Right.
it's bizarre. All right. Last meme ties into a topic we discussed earlier, which is the Dylan Mulvaney marketing efforts. And this meme actually is reminiscent of some other ones we've seen from Wish.com, which, if you're not familiar, is an e-commerce platform that often disappoints shoppers who go onto a website, see a beautiful photo of something, have an expectation, and when the actual product arrives, it is not as they hoped. So this is a recurring theme to make fun of sort of memes, Wish.com and things. And so I actually made this one myself.
Kind of reminds me of the microphone I've been using.
Which has been crackling in the last couple minutes
the crackling
too.
Microphone, yeah. We'll try to get that fixed before next week.
You should make a meme of your microphone.
We should make a meme about it. Yeah, exactly. The mic I thought I was getting versus the one I got. Yeah.
Exactly. So those were our 4 memes. I'll put up a poll on Twitter, and you can pick which one you think was funniest. As Jimmy said, it was slim pickings this week. For some reason, the news of the last 7 days didn't lend itself that well to humor, as we've seen in weeks past.
Yeah.
Any parting words of wisdom for us as we go through approaching tax day on Monday and the end of the...
I'm certainly not going to comment on taxes. As I've said for the past couple of weeks, enjoy your family and try to relax and, take everything in stride. My wife sent me, while the time we were blacked out, my wife sent me a thing that she reads, an account called Coffee and COVID, that there's like 20 or 23 states that are starting to form a coalition to do this gold-backed currency stuff. Florida, wow. It's basically Florida is one of the leaders of that. I assume Texas is involved, although I don't know who the 20 or 23 states are. So that'll be something to watch develop here over the next week for sure.
That would be a remarkable thing to watch globally. All of these non-U.S. countries start to just exit the dollar system and replace it with asset-backed currencies. I mean, we've been talking about this for a long time, but it's different to actually see it start to happen.
Yeah, for sure.
So, all right, everyone. Thank you very much. Apologize for the technical difficulties, and we will see you back here next week.